Steve Moore, former economic advisor to President Trump and chief economist at FreedomWorks, now joining us ahead of the president's speech a few moments from now. So, Steve, we know that this is likely to be a bit of a victory lap on the part of the White House. They have touted Bidenomics as the policies under this president that they say are working. What did this jobs report tell you?
Well, Sandra, there was some good news and some bad news in this report. I mean, the good news is, to me, the most important thing was that we had almost 500,000 new people entering the workforce. And Sandra, and you and I have been talking about for the last year, a big problem has been so many people not entering the workforce because they were getting all these government benefits. So it is a good thing they were getting people off the sofa starting to get into the workforce. I like that. But, you know, the number of jobs that were produced, there was 110,000 reduction in a revision. So this was not really a very good jobs number at all. Of course, the biggest problem of all with this U.S. economy right now is that although wages have slipped a little bit above inflation in the last month, for 22 of the last 24 months, wages are behind the rate of inflation. And what that means, Sandra, is that the average family today is about $5,000 poorer today than they were when Joe Biden came into office. So he has a tough selling job to the American people to say, oh, look at all the wonderful things I've done for the economy, when most people are poor.
Really interesting observation there. Also, by the way, I wanted to note that in my own research, I put in a request to the brain room to sort of calculate what they call real unemployment. It's not a number put out by the government like that headline number, but as you well know, Steve, that incorporates those that are discouraged from looking for work, or perhaps they're underemployed, as in working part-time because of the economic conditions, and that actually spiked to 7.1%. So that's something to keep in mind. Meanwhile, Steve, we have heard President Biden beating the drum that Bidenomics is a key part of his 2024 campaign. Listen here.
The plan is working. Bidenomics is just another way of saying restoring the American dream. That's what it is. The Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, I don't think they meant it as a compliment originally, started referring to my economic policy as Bidenomics. Well, guess what? It's working.
But a look at the inflation big picture, overall inflation up nearly 16% from January 2021, when Biden first took office, to last month. And food at home, your groceries, are up nearly 20%. A New York Post op-ed, inflation is rising again and Bidenomics is still to blame. The Consumer Price Index was at 3% in June and rose to 3.2% in July. And, you know, that's the reality of the situation people are living in. And, Steve, that's why when polled, most voters right now say that that is their primary concern, inflation, the economy, because they're feeling that.
Yeah, I think it's almost like the president is out of touch with Main Street America when he runs around the country saying how well his policies are working, when you have 2 out of 3 American families saying, no, these things aren't working for me. I'm in worse shape than I was 4 years ago. And so I think there's a kind of a detachment from reality. You know, you were saying, Sandra, that you have your kind of the back of the envelope calculation for the real unemployment rate. But, you know, I have my own back of the envelope calculation for the real inflation rate. And what I like to look at is food. I like to look at rent, mortgages, utilities, gas prices. Guess what, Sandra? Those aren't growing at 3 or 4%. Those are growing at 10%. And Americans understand that the real inflation rate that they're facing is putting real dent in their income. And the other statistic I wanted to point out to you is, look at what's happening to credit card debt and the ability to people to pay those credit card debts right now. And because people are going more into debt to maintain their living conditions because prices are so high.
Yeah, it's an important point, because as they go into more debt to pay for this inflation, the interest rates on that debt are going up to try to get the inflation down. So it's sort of that ugly cycle that we can get in. It seems we are in at this point. And meanwhile, Steve, a new report shows 4 in 10 high-income households, those that are earning more than $100,000 a year, are still living paycheck to paycheck. You know, Steve, I know that you watch the economy. You also watch the politics of all of this. And if that's the reality for American families right now, living paycheck to paycheck, so many of them, surely there will be political consequences to this if it's still the situation as we get closer to Election Day.
Well, I am old enough to remember what happened in 1980 when we had a Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, running against Ronald Reagan, and Reagan looked right into the camera in that very famous debate and said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And inflation was so high back then, people said, "No, I'm worse off." And I think that's exactly, if it turns out to be Trump versus Biden, I think that's exactly what Donald Trump will say. Do you feel better about your economic conditions and your finances today than 4 years ago? And if those polls are right, Sandra, 70% say no.
I think it's really interesting. And if I could just get to your preview of what we're about to hear from this president, he was laughing about Bidenomics. He said, well, Wall Street Journal is the one who coined the phrase, right? Well, I brought on Jerry Baker in the days that the president started using Bidenomics from the Wall Street Journal. And he said, well, it was originally used to describe a
failure.
What was a government picking winners and losers, a situation the federal government should not be putting themselves into. But they seem to be owning this. And we know that when the president speaks a few moments from now, there is good data out there, and they will likely present that to the American people as a result of their policies. What do you expect we're going to hear, and sort of how should the country digest what that is?
Well, look, to be fair, the job market is still strong, Sandra, no question about it. So there are jobs out there. If I were writing that speech for Joe Biden, I'd be talking about the fact that there are jobs available for Americans. That's a good thing. I never root against the American economy. The stock market, as you know, you cover this a lot, has been on a tear lately. So that's good news. But I think it's hard to persuade people that their lives are better off. And I remember that issue about debt is so critical because half of families now are saying they're not going to be able to pay, they're struggling to pay their credit card bills and their other debt. Look what's happened to mortgage rates. By the way, if you looked at that one, Sandra, it was 2.9% for a mortgage when Trump left office. It's 7.1% now. So Biden talked about the American dream. Isn't owning a house part of the American dream? Guess what? The middle class can't afford a house now because of these new rates.
Hard to believe. I mean, we're looking at, in the middle of this economic environment, the average home price in this country is topping $400,000. And with interest rate going up, that makes affordability really tough.
Exactly.
Meanwhile, personal savings are taking a dip. Pre-pandemic, it was like almost 9%. It took another dip in recent months, now to 3.5% as of July. So this is sort of a snapshot of the entire picture. Right now, we'll likely hear from the president a few moments from now. Steve, thank you. Good to have you on today.
Thanks, Sandra.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.